Also, accelerating access to literacy and weaving powerful partnerships. So definitely take time as you are walking out to browse through, even take photos, so that you can take the ideas from your table here and others in other counties across the Georgia home with you as well. But thank you for pulling together these actions. This is a big, big part of why we are here. This is what makes a summit and not just another conference. It's actually about coming up with an action plan that you can implement afterwards. So kudos to the Deal Center for being brave to create space for dialogue and conversation and action planning, which all too often we don't have time to do together. So excited to introduce the closing keynote. Very just in awe of Kathryn Lawler. She serves as the Chief Executive Officer of St. Joseph's Health System in Atlanta, Georgia. SJHS, commonly known, is rooted in the mission of the Sisters of Mercy, providing direct care to low-income and homeless individuals while addressing root causes of poor health, including affordable housing and racial inequity. Kathryn's 20-year career has focused on cross-sector interventions to address complex social problems. Beginning as a caseworker in downtown Atlanta, her work with the Congressional Commission on Health and Housing, and her tenure in a variety of roles, which I know her from at the Atlanta Regional Commission. She has worked to bring together transportation, housing, and healthcare systems to support vulnerable populations. She's led a large team as manager of the Aging and Health Resources Division and director as the Area Agency on Aging for Metro Atlanta, providing expertise in the challenges and opportunities of longevity, long-term services, and supports and health system reform. Recently, Kathryn served as the executive director of the Atlanta Regional Collaborative for Health Improvement, an alliance of 110 organizations with a shared 28-year commitment to improving health in Metro Atlanta by addressing the social determinants of health and racial and health inequity through collective impact strategy. Kathryn holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree from Harvard. Get ready to be, wow, okay.
Well, good morning. The only downside to agreeing to come to be a part of a meeting like that is having to listen to your bio read file. So, through the worst part, hopefully it's only up from here. It is my great pleasure and honor to be with you. And what a place of privilege to come at the end of this incredible agenda you've had. I can see the steam coming from your head for all the ideas that have been emerging at your tables, the notes you've been taking, and really appreciate the difference between an action summit and a conference. Love them both, but the energy of an action summit is great. So I hope that I can jump in on your conversation and provide just a little bit of perspective that sends you out the door and keeps you talking all the way home, and then hopefully gets you to do, maybe a Google search or something else to take some of these tools with you. So that's what I wanted to do in my time with you is really focus on two tools to think about how not only do we do excellent work, but how does that excellent work ultimately make fundamental, long-term, sustainable change? Because that is often our issue, is doing wonderful things today, but making a really lasting difference for tomorrow. So I want to offer you a couple tools to think about, and then I'm going to wear all my hats and tell you about how these tools were applied in a very practical way through the ARCHI, the Atlanta Regional Collaborative for Health Improvement. As Jen said, I am the CEO of St. Joseph's Health System. Just FYI, I've only been that for 45 days. But before that, I was the executive director at ARCHI. I served on the founding board at ARCHI, and now I'm back on the board. So I really wanted to bring both to our conversation today, if you don't mind. So, mostly my kids just think I go to meetings all day. I don't know about you. They're generally unimpressed. So let's see where we can go. So I wanted to my hope for our time together is to go over a couple of these tools and then give you some very practical ways to consider how you might use them in your own work. But all of this starts with the first question, which is, what is it that we see? How do we understand our complex challenges in our community? And how can we challenge ourselves to see things differently over and over again? Sometimes we know exactly what's in front of us, and sometimes there's unexpected curveballs that come. But seeing what we see, how we understand and define our community's needs, or our mission as an organization, what are we counting, and why are we counting those things? They were important yesterday. Are they still important for our community today? And in that counting, does it help us see what we need to see, or perhaps has it helped us, maybe it's caused us to miss something that's important and underlying? So I wanted to just start with a quick video challenging what is it that we see.
This is an awareness test. How many passes does the team in white make? The answer is 13.
All right.
Did you see the moonwalking bear?
What? Wow.
This is actually a wonderful commercial to watch out for cyclists, but it gives us all something to think about, right? So this question is, what do we see? What are we counting? And is it necessarily what's in front of us today? Another great story that you've probably heard over and over again, which is challenging what we see. It's a long time parable. It's been in many different communities and cultures, but the story I can share with you is about 6 blind men living in a village in India. And they were just like the older men that hang out at the Starbucks in my neighborhood that show up around 9 and argue about politics all morning or whatever it is that they discuss. And so they were just like, maybe you have a men's group in your community. The only issue was that they were blind. And the topic that they had been wrestling with and arguing over is, what is an elephant? Because between them, none of them had ever seen an elephant. And finally, the villagers got so tired of hearing them argue about it, they finally said, look, we're just going to take you. We'll bring you to see the elephant. And so they brought the men to see the elephant. But what happened was that each of the men had their hands on a different part of the elephant. And the man who was holding the trunk said, oh, elephants are just like snakes. I understand what a snake is. The man who had his hand on the ear said, oh, it feels like a big fan. The things that we use to keep ourselves cool in the summer. The man who had his hands around the leg said, oh, elephants are just like big trees. They're strong and thick. And on. The gentleman holding the tail said, oh, elephants must be just like roads. And of course, none of them were right at all. And ultimately, it was the sum of all of the parts plus something different, which was the elephant itself, right? So we've been telling stories, we've been challenging ourselves for many, many years, in many cultures, this recognition that sometimes we're doing absolutely the right thing for exactly what's in front of us, but we're missing, what is it? The elephant in the room, right? And so good change has happened every time people do this, a big step back, a contemplation about what have we learned and where does this might change our direction, might change our thinking, might help us see that moonwalking bear. And just from a little bit of my background, the father of public health, we didn't have public health actually until a guy named John Snow in the middle of the 1800s, in the middle of a giant cholera outbreak in London. He was a doctor, he was trained to focus on the individual. And at that time, London was right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution, and so factories were spewing out all kinds of pollution, and there was this fog everywhere, it was dark, and so they all thought cholera was due to the air. It was this horrible smell in the air, and that smell got you sick. It probably won't surprise you that another leading theory of the time was that immoral people got sick, right? So people, whoever was sick had done something really bad. and this was, karma coming back or whatever. And all kinds of ideas that if we, bled you enough, you would be fixed from cholera. So he took a very different approach. He was trained to focus on the individual, but instead he reached for different tools. He thought about maps, he thought about data, and he started plotting who was getting cholera and when, and that's the map you can see. And it led him to realize that the problem was not the air, it was not people and their immoral behaviors, but it was the pump. The water pump was spewing cholera, and everyone who was accessing the pump was getting sick, and all he had to do was take the handle off the pump so you couldn't use it anymore, and the outbreak stopped. So stepped back, saw something very different, left even his own training behind. He was trained to focus on the person, left all the tools that he might have had normally in his profession, and thought very differently about the problem and the situation. This has been an important part of all kinds of changes that we've seen, and I would come to you from the health perspective, but you've seen this in your area of work as well. Embarrassingly, that's my phone. Nothing's important, whatever it is. Not right now. So sorry about that. Flexibility, right? Nimbleness. Right, I'll do that in our job. Sorry about that. So, but this has been, we saw a huge change in thinking of health, really starting at the beginning of last century, when we began to see all kinds of different relationships. Research and science helping us understand that sometimes it's really poor quality housing that's causing the health problem. Often the whole body of work that you're probably familiar with around adverse childhood experiences really was about this step back, looking at something different and understanding the problem and therefore the solutions differently. The whole framework for social determinants of health comes out of this, and also our deepening understanding of racism and racial inequality on health. All of these new frameworks and new understandings of the problem and the potential interventions have all come from this same kind of thinking. Stepping back, seeing things differently, seeing possibly that wasn't there before. I can also tell you the same kind of thinking brought us this, hopefully something in your daily life. Who was this wonderful guy finally figured out, other than hitting that glass ketchup bottle endlessly on the bottom, we could just turn the thing upside down and things would be much better. So great way of thinking, impacting big social change, but certainly even at your local diner, hopefully you see that kind of thinking improving your life. So if it's about changing the way we think, how do we practically get into that? Is it really moonwalking bear hunting that we're supposed to do? Or what are the tools and techniques we can use to dive in to seeing things fundamentally different? And I just offer this is the big question we have to ask ourselves. Let's see if this video turns on.
You're standing on the edge of a river. All of a sudden, a flailing, drowning child comes floating by. Without thinking, you dive in, grab the child, and swim to shore. Before you can recover, another child comes floating by. So you dive in and rescue her as well. Then another child drifts into sight. And another, and another. Eventually, hopefully, some wise person will ask, who keeps chucking these kids in the river? And we'll head upstream to find out.
So when we ask ourselves who keeps chucking these things in the river, it really is about building a full stream strategy. And that's the tool I want to help you think a little bit about today. And as I said, I'll give you some practical examples in just a minute. It's really embracing a full stream strategy and by doing that is when we start to see the moonwalking bears. When we start to understand that we thought we were holding a rope, but it was really the tail of a much larger issue. That full stream strategy means a commitment to being very present today in the downstream. People have specific needs and help and services that we have to deliver, and that's our promise to our community today. But also when we start to go upstream, we can understand that there are challenges in our communities that are not dependent on any one individual, but that they are inherent to the structure of our community. The supply of what's available. Do we have enough quality schools? Do we need a different workforce or teachers? Does everyone have the quality housing that they need to live in? And then ultimately, as we move upstream, the third element, and very important, of a full stream strategy is thinking about our mindsets. What is it about our core beliefs, our understanding of the world, the lenses that we might bring to things, sometimes even our biases that prevent us from seeing what we need to see. And ultimately, when we change those mindsets, they filter all the way downstream and can change the way that we act today and also what is available for our community tomorrow. So a full stream strategy, I would argue that is the one that is an important tool for thinking and changing in our communities, but making that change long-term, significant, and sustainable. The other tool is that I wanted to lay out for you today is probably a tool you have heard about. It is collective impact, which is a whole body of work that began to emerge in the middle 2000s and was an exciting new framework, but like a lot of exciting new frameworks, sometimes it becomes the shiny, sparkly thing and everyone moves on. And the thing about collective impact is sometimes it can feel like two good words that feel better together, but there is a little bit more to it. So I wanted to dive in and talk a little bit about if you embrace a full stream strategy, why a structure like collective impact or another is absolutely essential. The full stream might help us see what we need to be working on. Collective impact ultimately is changing how we work. And if you only get half of that equation, changing what we work on but not how we work, or changing how we work but not what we work on, I would argue we're not going to be able to get to that significant, lasting, and sustainable change that we want to see. So collective impact is a little bit more than two words that sound better together. Well, there's a whole strategy, and you could do a 3-day workshop on what is collective impact, but it boils itself down to 5 core principles. And it really is about people coming together from very different parts of our community, working on maybe different issues, holding different parts of that elephant, if you will, and organizing themselves under a common agenda with a shared goal. Recognizing that it's not just me measuring what you do, or me reporting out what I do, but we're going to have some shared measurements that span our work together. That if in order to stay at this table for change, it's all going to have to be mutually reinforcing. I always say, it's wonderful the first 6 months of a collaborative, but after that your board starts saying, what are you doing going to those meetings? So it's got to be mutually reinforcing. Communication is essential, and we can talk more about that. But ultimately, the collective impact strategy is reliant on this idea of backbone support. A neutral community quarterback, you've probably heard many phrases for this, who can step forward and be a table where people can come together over a significant period of time, bring what they do best, but ultimately, collective impact is about how do we make 1 + 1 equal 3? Because our community needs so much more. We have to keep doing the excellent work we're doing, and collective impact is the table that makes that happen. It really is about this question of once we start to change the way we work, what are the natural and predictable things that might happen that will get in our way of making that change sustainable, and how can collective impact move against those traditional forces that stop us in our track normally. And I would argue for you that collective impact, this shared table, and I'll tell you a little bit more about the collective impact strategy that we had at Archie. It really has a couple core components beyond what you'll read in the literature that really make it work. And they have a lot to do with these couple things. When we are recognizing whatever big issue that is coming at us, the numbers of the challenge, the complex challenge that we're facing, they are significant. We've embraced a full stream strategy at this point. And so that means our table, our agenda is very full. It's overwhelming what is coming at us. And oftentimes, the enemy of embracing complex issues is our desire to have silver bullet solutions. And I will tell you that silver bullet, SB, you flip those letters around, that's almost always the situation. Silver bullet solution can be very appealing, and it is a great marketing strategy, but it's usually not the path to long-term sustainable change. But we have to have a place to hold that change, because that wave is overwhelming. And when we stare it down, if our best bet is to grab a raincoat and head for the hills, we're not going to be able to make that lasting difference. Collective impact can also be extremely powerful because we're talking about changing the way we do things, and there is risk inherent in innovation. It can't be that I challenge you to do something different and then step back and watch and see how it goes. We're going to have to stand together, and a whole bunch of the stuff that we're going to try is not going to work. Even though you'll probably write in your grant report how it did go well, and I know how to do that too, but we have to have a table where we can hold the risk that comes with that innovation, so that as we're trying new things, as we're learning as we fail forward, that there is a neutral place to do that, and we don't have any one organization that has to hold all of that, because when that risk is too great, we will stay doing the things that we've always done. Collective impact is also great for this, because when we are driving systems change, the one thing we have to be absolutely aware of, the only guaranteed thing that will occur is the system will push back. And that's whatever system you might be working in. And that is just the nature of systems. So we have to be ready when we're pushing systems change that it will push back, and how can we stand together to keep driving that change forward, so that when the system pushes back, we're ready to keep moving forward, not getting pushed back to the way things were. Collective impact is a wonderful collaborative effort to be able to withstand that inevitable outcome of making changes that the system pushes back. I'll also tell you that when you go upstream, you have to get outside the sector. There's hardly a complex challenge you can work on where you'll say, oh, we went upstream and I can stay exactly in my lane. I know everybody who works in this field, so I know all the partners I have. Going upstream will inevitably mean you'll have to start working with people you've never worked with before. Sectors will have to come together that don't communicate well, who don't measure the same things, who don't have the same purpose and incentives. So a collective impact strategy is a wonderful neutral platform for doing this. I've always said, as we try to build bridges between different sectors, it doesn't ever work to say, let's meet halfway. You have to meet them 95% of the way. Get all up in their business. Understand everything they do, what makes them tick, what are the reports they have to file, what are the data that matter to them. Collective impact strategy is a wonderful place for a neutral platform for doing that kind of cross-sector partnership and making it last. It's not just that I invited you to my house, but we have a shared house together that we're trying to be a part of. I've worked with many hospital systems, and I can tell you they're the most competitive people in the world. They don't even go to meetings in each other's offices, right? So very practical things that can be helpful with a collective impact strategy. And then lastly, we have to overcome the busyness of today. That downstream work is really powerful, and it takes a lot of time and energy, and most of us work in spaces where there's never enough resources, whether it's time, whether it's staff, or whether it's money. And so that is always the challenge of long-term sustainable change. Who's got the time to make that difference? And the collective impact strategy, I always say that backbone support, what is that really? They're the people who do the homework in between the meetings. You know, it's a great conversation. We figure out exactly what needs to do. And by the time everyone gets in their car, they're overwhelmed with their real job, right? So collective impact strategy holds the homework and keeps the change moving forward to make sure we have enough time to really see the opportunities for innovation and moving forward. So great tools maybe, theoretical, so let me tell you what it looks a little bit like to implement this in real form. So ARCHI, the Atlanta Regional Collaborative for Health Improvement, is something that I've been a part of since 2012. It was a group of organizations who came together very concerned about the fact that we spend over $12 billion in Fulton and DeKalb counties every year on healthcare in Atlanta. And yet in many of our neighborhoods, we have some of the worst health outcomes in Georgia. And so holding that sort of dichotomy of how much we're spending and some of the challenges in our health outcomes, built a collaborative that's now 110 organizations that certainly include all those hospitals and insurance companies, all the usual suspects that you might think should be in a health collaborative, but 70% of those members are from transportation, they're from housing, they're from food security, they're from education. So really a broad collaborative that is focused on, yes, we would really like it if healthcare dollars were paid every time someone was healthy, instead of how we do it today, which is paying every time someone's sick. And we are very hopeful and optimistic that one day that will happen in Georgia and in our country. But until then, the collaborative really began to focus on what are all the elements of our community that can contribute to your health. So the social determinants of health framework you're probably familiar with. So we will remain hopeful that the money will start flowing in the right direction, but until it does, we have to think about all of those factors and how we can do that. So centering the social determinants of health, all of those 110 organizations made a 28-year commitment to staying at the table and making that fundamental change. The other thing about ARCHI is it started out by a group of people who I can tell you can take you right to the graveyard of failed collaboratives in Atlanta. We have one. And there have been many, many things that have started and then stopped, And so one of the things they did right from the beginning is said, we're going to stick together, but we're going to learn by doing. We're not going to stay theoretical. The chart that we build, the flow chart, the boxes on this PowerPoint, that's all well and good, but we're going to get in the community and work together and then build our model based on what we did together, not what we thought we should do together. The first years of ARCHI's life really were that organic collaboratives, partners coming together to address an issue in the community, focusing on that, measuring outcomes, seeing if it would work. And there was a lot of excellent work done the first 6 to 7 years of Archie's history. But then it was time to take a step back. It was time to recognize that we had a walking bear right in the middle of all that excellent work. And for us, it was a recognition that we had been talking a lot about inequity, but we really weren't doing anything about it. And in 2017, the partnership made a very significant commitment to understanding the history of our community, the practices, the policies, and prejudices that had led to many of our outcomes, and recognized that inequality, particularly racial inequality, was the big moonwalking bear in the middle of it. And no matter how many times we counted those passes, we had to begin to center that in our work. But the other thing we engaged in was a process of very deep listening. So we were so proud of the projects and the innovations, and I could fill you with all kinds of stories and details about how housing and health came together, how MARTA partnered with a health organization, and people were doing things they'd never done before to really recognize the social determinants of health and work together differently and deliver services differently. But we stepped back to listen to the people that we had been serving, and there had been great work done. But we engaged in a process of really deep listening to our partners and to those who had been involved in our projects. And the result of that was a brand new strategy that emerged. I think it really probably was holding onto the rope, holding onto the trunk of the elephant, but it was the moment where we could see the elephant differently. And that's represented in a brand new strategy that Archie has adopted. And I'll just show you a quick video of that.
Good health requires more than health care. Quality education and jobs, affordable housing, safe communities, and access to healthy food are essential to health and well-being. Atlanta has resources, yet many of our health outcomes lag behind parts of the United States and the world. Why? Because it's far too difficult for far too many to access what they need to be healthy. The burden of navigating disconnected services falls on the person who needs it. If Bethany needs help with rent, she might have to apply to 5 or 6 different agencies before getting aid. But Bethany also needs support for food and after-school care for her kids, and an appointment to monitor her diabetes, and, well, the cycle of applications and eligibility starts over again for each. Even if Bethany manages to break through all these barriers, she still may never access the mental services she needs. Health is only achieved when socioeconomic factors are stabilized. But the path to getting there requires too much from those in greatest need. The challenges are even greater for Black people and people of color in our community. There's a better way. We must invert the burden away from those in need. When the person or family in need is at the center, processes are designed to meet their needs. Administrative work for agencies that deliver care is reduced and streamlined. And Bethany can stop chasing down the services she needs and focus on stabilizing her life and her family. We designed the system we have. We can redesign it, and we must start by meeting people where they are, coordinating care, and inverting the burden. Join us as we work toward a brighter, healthier future.
So Archie adopted the Invert the Burden strategy as its new full-stream approach to delivering on this 28-year promise of changing health outcomes in our community and making sure that Atlanta is a place where everyone can thrive. So I just want to finish by telling you kind of what a very practical application of that full-stream strategy looked like and is actually looking like for Archie today. In the downstream, we learned it was very important to do what you see in that video, is we had to change the way people were accessing care. Our research showed that on average it took almost 20 hours of an individual's work to seek out assistance for rent for 1 month. That was being matched by 9.5 hours of work by that agency, and over 50% of that time, all those hours did not result in a rent check being delivered because there wasn't enough money at the end of the month anyway. We did another assessment that showed that our case managers at all of our partners, on average, were working in between 3 to 4 different technologies a day, with with at the lowest being 3, one agency had case managers having to operate in 12 different technologies in order to deliver the care. So they were spending over 60% of their time on data entry, most of which was duplicate. And it won't surprise you to know that was causing burnout as well as an incredibly inefficient system of care. So standing in the downstream is about changing the way that services are delivered at that individual level. I'll show you the examples. At the community level, it was a recognition that our community has many wonderful assets. We are the biggest cheerleaders of what it means to live in Atlanta, and I think it is a great place for so many people. But we do not have enough of what it means, what all people need to thrive, from education to housing to jobs near good transportation as well. And so our partnership is very committed to that midstream approach of changing the supply through creative partnerships. And then at the very upstream, again, a recognition I told you about when we saw finally our Milwaukee Bear, that we had some underlying mindsets that were rooted in a deep racist history and past that we had to start to change if we were ever going to move the needle on our health outcomes, because what it means to be healthy is so different in Atlanta depending on your zip code, depending on your family history, and depending on many of your demographic characteristics, and that had to change. So that is the invert the burden full stream strategy and how it's being applied today. So in the downstream, we're reorganizing the system of care to put people at the center. It's a wonderful phrase, but it actually takes a lot of re-engineering. You saw in the video the idea of paperwork just burying people who need support and services. And how many times we found that our agencies were asking people lots of questions about their needs, and the result was a photocopied list of resources for them to call. And that was no longer an acceptable path to care. If we had organized healthcare around that, it would be some version of showing up at the emergency room and doing your own assessments, and that would never work, right? We wouldn't find that acceptable, but that really is part of our challenge. So we are building a different way of delivering care in a very practical way that puts people at the center. And specifically, that means that we're working with 2 health systems, the Mercy Care Health System and Grady Health System. And how it plays out is that individuals who have unmanaged chronic conditions, primarily diabetes and high blood pressure, are referred to a community health worker. And that community health worker doesn't start out by going through their numbers, because they just spent time with the doctor going through their numbers, and they've been meeting with the doctor plenty, and whatever that doctor is saying, no matter how smart she is, it's not working, right? And so the community health worker just starts by getting to know what's important in your life, what is going on, what might be other needs that you have that have nothing to do with our clinical care, that might be the needs that are making it hard for you to take all that great health education we've been giving you and turn it into the change that you need. And that health worker then develops a series of very person-driven priorities. So if it's about being able to walk the long distance to get to the stadium for your granddaughter's graduation, then we hold that up as the #1 goal. If it's that you're so stressed about housing, you have no prayer of getting a handle on your blood pressure, then we're going to deal with that housing. And so what we have done is first started with that person-centered goal-setting approach, but then built a network of diverse providers, legal assistance, housing, food, job training, transportation. And those providers stand at the ready to accept the referrals from the community health workers. So she does not then tell the patient, here's all the agencies that you should call that might be able to help you. She says, you have 3 appointments next week. Here's the MARTA card to help you get there. I'll be following up to make sure you made it. I'll help you reschedule if life happens, because it happens for everybody. We will see this through. She then receives a message that this assessment was done at that agency, what services can be delivered, and this becomes a part of that comprehensive care plan. So the individual can deal primarily with their community health worker that has their goals, the patient's goals written down, and that the agencies, they work together, but around the patient, rather than the patient having to navigate toward all of these things. And I hope it doesn't surprise you that after 2 years of doing this, we have seen blood pressures go down, BMI go down, diabetes that had not been under control become under control, and all of our personal assessments around individual mental health have all improved for every patient that's been engaged in that project as well. The mids are just an example of a midstream approach. So what we have been working to do is say, in our community, and this may be true in yours, housing is such a problem. Affordable housing has become an absolute crisis. And so what we are doing, there's a lot of great work going on. We need 8 times more of it. But we felt that our midstream work was to bring non-traditional partners to that table. So we have been working with our health systems in Atlanta, actually since 2019. They were all on board and then this pandemic came, but they're back at the table, and I'm very happy to tell you that we will be breaking ground next week on the first affordable housing development in Atlanta that is being partially funded by 2 hospital systems. Wow. So we're right to the table. You are here to deliver health, your promises about a healthy community, and we have to change the way this money flows if we're going to have a hope at changing that midstream effort around supply. And then in the very upstream, and this is always where the hardest work is, and again, it's really important to have that long-term commitment. And we've made some progress and we've had to take some steps back. But I told you which was the recognition that we had, and more clear recognition in 2017. It began a real process of working with all those 110 partners to explore what does it mean? What does this mean, the intersection of race and health? What is the history that has actually led to this? How do we go from kind of this much understanding to a deep enough understanding that might change the way we think and the way we work? And so Archie has been leading conversation, dialogue, but also working with its partners to try to learn and understand differently. And a recent example of this, in case you want to check it out on the website, was a project to go and interview individuals who had or are experiencing homelessness. And 25 individuals agreed to share their stories in a format, if you might be familiar, there's a national project called StoryCorps that collects stories of Americans. And so the same format, where they were willing to share their stories. And some of them are 15 minutes long, and some of them are over an hour. And we worked with our partners to organize very intensive 3-day workshops to not only hear those stories, listen to those stories, but to train ourselves to think about how we listen and hear differently. What does it mean to listen and truly embrace intellectual humility, to let go of everything we might have known about a person who looks like this, or about the issue at hand, homelessness, and the discussion we were going to have, we're all great at roundtable discussions. How can we let go of all of those past practices and come to this listening in a deeper, more humble, open way? And I can tell you that as someone whose first job was working with homeless individuals, who for a while thought she knew everything there was to know about being homeless in Atlanta, and for a while I knew a whole lot of the homeless individuals in Atlanta by name, had to very much change my understanding and my thinking, and left with the understanding that homelessness is certainly about housing, but what we haven't done enough of is provide space for healing, to understand the trauma that brings people to homelessness, and that our system of care, if it just keeps doling out services, it won't really move the needle on homelessness, because we have to center that transformation and healing, because so much of what brought people to the story they were sharing today actually started when they were 4, or for some of them when they were 2, and much younger. So that kind of training ourselves to listen more deeply, to hear how inequity manifests itself, but also really trying to speak out and understand that we have to make these connections. And as gun violence is on the rise in our community, that we have a part of that table too. So collective impact for Archie hasn't just been about, hey, everybody come join us. How do we join other tables differently and show up, even when it makes us very uncomfortable? I helped co-author this op-ed on violence, and had a whole lot of learning to do from other experts and community members to be a part of it. It felt like a big limb. I, for a while, was like that rhinoceros out on the tightrope. And that discomfort was something that is a part of all of that change, understanding mindsets and really being in that upstream and supporting one another to do it. So just, again, I wanted to just give you some practical examples of that, because it's all well and good to talk about, but if we don't really know what it looks like, smells like, what is the project you do, who's the staff running this stuff, where is this organization? I know that's the work that you all are so good at. But this is how Archie, this is just an example of one of the elements of Archie's invert the burden strategy that is really doing its best, making tons of mistakes all the time, and I'd love to come back and give you the presentation on everything that went wrong. I didn't focus on that because you're just getting to know me, but we'll start with what went well. What is a practical full stream approach, and how has a collective impact strategy sort of helped us stick with it, strive for that sustainable change, be uncomfortable, be ready when the system starts to really push back. So I wanted to just leave you with, you're gonna get in your car. By the way, it's really lovely in here. It is very hot outside. It was hot yesterday, it's really hot today. So put your air conditioning on first, but when you get in the car, as you think about heading back and the great topics, conversations you've had, the excellent work you've done thinking about partnerships and change, how might these tools of a full stream strategy and thinking about the practical ways that collective impact, two wonderful words that sound better together, but that can practically support you on the journey of change in your community today. So with that, I'm going to close out, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'm happy to share the slides if you like them, so no problem. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Oh my gosh. I'm just imagining 5 years from today, what is going to happen and emerge from the energy in this room. Thank you so much, Kathryn, for sharing. It's incredible. Just the richness of your deep understanding, your intellectual humility, deep listening. I feel like you started that, and over the past 2 days at the Governor's Summit, we're seeing the actions that are laying out new frameworks, and if you haven't noticed, or if you noticed, kudos, because the way that we're framing these conversations as well also include the individual community commitments and the upstream societal challenges that we're facing. So before I go into closing comments, I also want to remind you, keep this as your guide. Reflect back on this. You have the incredible talks that have been recorded. We're in conversations with the incredible presenters to see if we can send these videos back to you so that you can rewatch and share with your teams. But there are also resources in the very, very back that have been generously given by the presenters to be little tokens of knowledge. And one example, which we slid in here because we had an extra spread and we needed to fill the space, but this is some work that is being done by, it's called the Family and Child Wellbeing Series. And as Kathryn reminded us, it's important to go deep into the community for deep listening sessions. So if you enjoyed the conversation framework that we had this summit, there are 6 other conversations that you can invite others in your community to join, whether it's around literacy, so early learning for lifelong success, building resilience for brighter futures, family health and child well-being. Because as you know, the goal here is to equip children with the language and literacy that they need to thrive and learn, and to be able to read, to learn, and become great citizens in this world. So, all that said, we have so many more resources than you right here. And to wrap this up, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being here, for being fully present, for giving it all, to sharing, hopefully pouring your heart out as well during our conversations. I hope you left inspired, and if you want to snap photos of all of the incredible ideas, I recommend doing it. There's hopefully contact information on each of the post-it notes there, so if you find an idea and you want to connect with another county, please do go for it. So, thank you for being here, and then there's going to be a short summit survey. We'd love your feedback. We want to hear it, all of it, good, bad, ugly, all the things. This is all here for you. And then I want to give a special thank you to our sponsor, Georgia Foundation for Early Care and Learning. Thank you. As well as Georgia College and State University for hosting in this glorious space. And then most importantly, presented by the Deal Center, I really want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Teresa, Dr. Lavelle, and the whole team for putting this on. And then lastly, most importantly, you for being here, for showing up, for being here and being fully present. I hope you left inspired. I sure did. I tried. That was amazing. I'm so blown away by all of you, and that you were the ones doing the work day to day, and inspiring and stuff. And it's the long road, but it's worth it. So thank you for being here. Safe travels home, and we'll be in touch. Cheers.